Oliver Payne, who's the founder and CEO of the Hunting Dynasty. Oliver is going to be talking about how to affect behavioural change within an organisation using some simple techniques.
Thank you very much.
I'll stick out your belt.
Yeah, stick in my pocket maybe. Yeah. Is it working? Yeah, it's working good. Yeah. Okay. I'll see if I can stick to time. It's just a sticky pointer thing. So, using behavioural theory to promote sustainable living. First thing I'm going to say is probably not very controversial, which is using... Well, it's changed on here, but not on there. How does that work? I have my own private... The only thing is I know what's coming up, so it's no good me seeing it. That's it. A sustainable future requires people to change their behaviour. That's kind of quite straightforward. That behaviour is a change in purchase behaviour, but also a change in lifestyle behaviour. Sometimes actually it's a combination of the two. But those changes, particularly in purchase behaviour, is kind of quite familiar to the communications industry to a certain extent. It's kind of mostly about switching purchasing habits. So instead of buying object X, please buy object X, slightly more efficient. The kind of AIDA model works. AIDA is awareness leading to interest, leading to desire, leading to action. It's your kind of standard old school marketing model. Kind of works, or half of it kind of works. But trying to change purchase behaviour and trying to get people to purchase more sustainable goods is kind of not necessarily, it's not easy if you're trying to do side or downshifting. Okay? But it's kind of reasonably usable. But changes in lifestyle behaviour is something that's sort of much less familiar to us in the communications industry. It's not really something that normally we get involved in because it doesn't often have a purchase at the end of it. You're kind of asking people to break with their habitual patterns of behaviour. The AIDA model I mentioned before, awareness leading to interest and desire and action, often feels very weak. Just knowledge and awareness are rarely enough to get people to do something, as we all know, otherwise we wouldn't be sat here today. Most of sort of changes in lifestyle behaviour are not really aspirational, and mostly injunctions. Don't do this, stop doing that, stop speeding, don't park here, recycle, those kind of things. So change in purchase behaviour and change in lifestyle behaviour are the two things that we think we can change, but there's one thing that we all have in common that spans both those things, every single one of us, and this is a kind of a realisation of ours that blows away. I mean, Chris was talking about it earlier on about ABC1s and C2Ds and E's and how do you talk to this sector and how do you talk to these people. The one thing that unites us all is that despite being generally capable and smart, we are all highly context dependent. So highly context dependency means that we change the way we behave depending on the context in which we are being asked to behave, which is quite a significant kind of understanding, right? So what that means is that we're not really purely rational. We can't be purely rational because if I give you a choice of 5 items and you choose item number 2, and I give you a choice of 3 items and you choose a different item out of that set, because of the amount of options that I've given you, we're not really being very rational. But we also know that we're not irrational. Irrational would just be weird. Wouldn't it just? The guy down the end of the road shouting at the bin, he's the kind of the irrational guy, right? So that's not us. The reason we know that we're not irrational is because context dependency is measurable. And the rest of what I'm going to talk to you about is that measurable context dependency. Now, I'm not going to ask you to read this, and I'm not going to read it all out for you either, but these are just some of the ways in which we are context dependent, some of the ways in which we're non-rational. The first one up there, something you're probably familiar with, which is aversion to extremes. It's a kind of non-rational behaviour that we have. It basically says that we prefer the middle option, which is an odd thing. So if you go to a coffee shop, you mostly, I'll have the medium-sized coffee, please. But that's not really, we're not really asking what volume of coffee we want, just we'll have the middle option. You know that they're kind of non-rational behaviours because if you asked Spock, he would say to you that it's just illogical. So how do we use these universal quirks to create sustainable behaviour? Because that's the key thing, like knowing that is fine. How do we actually get the rubbers hit the road? Or we do it in 19 different ways. We're not going to do all of these 19 different ways today. I'm going to take you through about 10 or so, maybe less. I might skip some depending on the time. The first four I want to talk to you about is simply asking using the right words, using the right images, and using the right authority. That's something that feels quite familiar to most marketeers, although these particular examples won't. So simply asking. In an experiment in Yale, whilst queuing for food, I did a little study, 40% of the students took a serving of fruit. So that's your base level. They just simply asked the servers to ask them if they would like fruit or fruit juice, and it rocketed right up. 70% of the students took a serving of fruit. That's simply the exposure effect at work there. By simply asking someone something, you can change the way they behave. This is one of the first very simple examples of context dependency. So what about ask using the right words? Well, it's a really good example from Arizona in America. There's a petrified forest, so it's a lovely place to visit. There's lots of wood that's fallen on the floor. It's quite light. It's quite easy to pick up and walk away with. Many people do. And they had a problem with theft. They tried these different signs. The sign on the left is the sign they had originally. It's my highlighting there. Many past visitors have removed petrified wood from the park, changing the natural state of the petrified forest. That's the sign they originally had. That sign gave them an 8% theft rate, which they thought was a bit high. It is a bit high. And they thought, well, we better get some help. So they brought some behavioural psychologists in, some behavioural theorists, and said, what can we do about this? And they said, well, immediately that sign is not so good, so we'll get a base level. Of course, the base level is let's just take all the signs out and see what happens. So you take all the signs out and you get a 3% theft rate. So obviously, temptation there obviously is my work is done and here's the bill. But they thought, well, we can do better than nothing, right? We must be able to do better than nothing. So they tried a different sign, knowing what they know about using the right words. Please don't remove petrified wood from the park in order to preserve the natural state of the forest. So that gave them a 1.7% theft rate. So yes, they can do better than that. So you got from 8 to 1.7 depending on the words that you use. The reason for this is quite simple, is that when you focus on sort of an injunctive norm, stop, don't, it's much more superior than when you focus on a descriptive norm. And you can see on the first, that basically what you're doing in the first one is telling everybody what everybody else is doing, but saying, please don't you do it. And on the first one, and the last one, obviously, you're instructing people what to do. So it's a very important learning there. Both social norms and the framing effect are at work. Equally, you must use the right images, or images that you use can create a different context. This is a pretty popular and well-liked ad from 20 or 30 years ago in America. It's an American Indian called Ionized Cody, strange name. The sort of 6 frames there. So the film goes, he's rowing up a polluted river, in his canoe, he stops off at a shore and it's polluted and got rubbish on it. He walks up to a road, someone drives by, drops some rubbish at his feet, he turns to the camera and says, people start pollution, people can stop it, which is true. It's very well liked, it's done very well. It was the 16th best television commercial of all time, top 100, loads of awards, everybody loves it. However, you look at the first kind of scenes that that are being described in this ad, is reinforcing this really damaging message that people do litter. Very similar to the sort of visual version of the linguistic version before. You could simply change that by making a very clean environment and having the people that were littering the ones that were outside of the social norm. They weren't the ones that were doing it. So again, what you're doing is you're just showing people that everybody litters, and you shouldn't do it. The fourth one, ask using the right authority. Everybody thinks this is about celebrity. In some cases it is. In other cases, it's simply about brands. Sutton Council had a great little scheme where they wanted to give everybody some loft insulation, so they, not least of all the logistical advantages of using B&Q, but they asked B&Q to hold the stock, and they told all their local residents that B&Q would hold it for them, and that's where they could go and get it from.